Wake TF up. Welcome to the Sovereign Signal, the channel of sovereign fire. Food, survival controlled segment 1. Seeds, sovereignty stolen. The living cycle they broke. For thousands of years, the rhythm of survival was sovereign and simple. Plant, harvest, save, replant. Heirloom seeds weren't just inputs. They were inheritance, living memory of soil, weather, and the hands that tended them. Families kept jars filled with next season's promise. Diversity wasn't a marketing word. It was survival. If blight hit one variety, another stood. If drought came, the hardier strains carried the year. Seeds were culture, resilience, and autonomy made tangible. This cycle was the foundation of food sovereignty. It was the unbroken covenant between farmers and nature. It was the assurance that survival was in the hands of communities, not corporations. The corporate invasion, that sovereignty was systematically dismantled in a single generation. Beginning in the late 20th century, corporations turned seeds from living commons into licensed products. Genetic modification and hybridization were paired with patents and contracts. A farmer as age-old right, save and replant, was converted into a breach of intellectual property. The act of saving life became actionable. The harvest became a subscription. Monsanto pioneered this model with its Roundup-ready crops. Farmers were told these seeds would deliver higher yields and reduce labor. What they weren't told was that saving seeds would become illegal. Contracts attached to seed bags forbade saving and replanting. Enforcement became policy. Case law. Proof of enclosure Bowman v. Monsanto Co., 2013. U.S. Supreme Court. Farmer Vernon Bowman bought commodity soybeans from a grain elevator, knowing they likely contained Monsanto's patented Roundup Ready trait. He planted them, saved seed from that crop, and replanted. Monsanto sued. The court ruled against Bowman, holding that the patent right wasn't exhausted by one sale if the buyer used the product to replicate the patented invention. Venom truth. Saving seeds became infringement. Sovereignty became theft in the eyes of the law. This precedent reverberated worldwide. Farmers in Canada, India, and Africa faced similar restrictions. Patent law became the weapon of corporate control. From commons to concentration seed markets consolidated at speed. Across the 1990s-2010s, mergers combined agrochemical giants and seed houses into a handful of global entities with cross-control of genetics, traits, and inputs. By 2020, just 4 corporations controlled over 60% of the global seed market: Bayer, Corteva, Syngenta, BASF. They dictate what genetics are available, under what terms, at what price, with which attached chemical packages farmers now shop inside a controlled catalog. The catalog dictates the methods. The methods dictate the spend. The spend dictates the debt. Hybrids, GMOs, and dependency by design hybrid seeds were step 1. Vigorous first-generation yields, sterile or unstable second-generation outcomes. Save them and you get inferior performance or failure. GM traits were step 2. Engineered resistance, for example, herbicide tolerance, insecticidal proteins, and trait stacks, each tied to specific chemicals and branded protocols. Farmers are told, for best results, use the recommended herbicide and pesticide regimen, not optional. Baked into the economics and agronomy. Heirloom seeds gave independence and genetic diversity. Hybrid and GM seeds deliver yield under controlled conditions and clamped dependence. Venom truth. Dependency isn't accidental. It's product architecture. Biodiversity collapse. Traditional farming leveraged diversity to hedge risk. Corporate seed regimes impose uniformity. Monoculture is efficient until it isn't. Uniform genetics create uniform vulnerabilities. One pest adaptation or pathogen shift can hammer vast acreage at once. Farmers are then told the answer is another trait, another spray, another stack. The ratchet turns. Scientific proof. The CR warns that 75% of crop diversity has been lost since the 20th century. Farmers are trapped in monocultures, dependent on corporate seeds. The farmers' cry farmers worldwide have protested seed monopolies. India, farmers resisted GM cotton and corporate seed laws. Africa, farmers fought against GM maize and seed patents. Europe, farmers protested EU seed regulations favoring corporations. The cry is global. Farmers are being crushed by debt, stripped of independence, and poisoned by corporate contracts. The slap in the face, they made the rules to a game you never knew you were playing. They wrote the language you were never taught. They set the board, moved the pieces, and told you it was progress. But the longer you walk this path, the more you see the trap. The game is monopoly. Corporations own the seeds, the patents, the contracts, and the courts. Farmers are pawns. Communities are captives. Survival is the prize. Why we must stand. If we do not stand, farmers will remain trapped in debt and dependence. If we do not expose the theft, people will remain fed by corporations, not communities. If we do not reclaim sovereignty, survival itself will remain corporatized. Venom truth. Farmers are our people. Their struggle is our struggle. Their sovereignty is our survival. Food Survival Controlled Segment 2. Chemicals. Land poisoned, people sickened. The chemical covenant you weren't told you signed. When corporations enclosed the seed cycle, they stitched a second leash to the farm gate. Chemicals. Engineered traits did not arrive alone. They came bound to proprietary herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, fertilizers, wetting agents, desiccants, and synergists. Seed choice became input choice. Input choice became contract obligations. Recommended programs became de facto mandates. Agronomy was rewritten as a subscription plan, and the farm was recast as a laboratory field trial, with farmers paying for the privilege. This covenant has a simple architecture. Seed chemistry lock-in, herbicide tolerance and pest resistance traits are designed to pair with specific chemical products. Protocol compliance. Stewardship programs prescribe application timings, rates, and stacks. Deviation voids warranties and market access. Market standardization. Processors and retailers prefer uniform traits, pushing growers into chemical regimes that deliver standardized outputs. Narrative laundering. Crop protection. Feeding the world. Climate resilience. Phrases that convert dependency into virtue. Under the covenant, farmers do not manage pests and fertility, they buy them. And once bought, they keep buying. Glyphosate, the global spray that became a global residue glyphosate, rose to ubiquity because Roundup-ready crops made it effortless to blanket fields and leave the crop standing. That convenience birthed a monoculture of method, broadcast sprays season after season across tens of millions of hectares. Low toxicity was repeated until it became belief. Meanwhile, evidence stacked up where belief refused to look. Residues. Glyphosate and its metabolite AMPA show up in soil, surface and groundwater, rain, and in residue tests on cereals, pulses, and processed foods. Human biomonitoring detects glyphosate in urine samples across populations. Cancer litigation. Juries in landmark cases, for example, Johnson and Hardman in the U.S., heard testimony linking occupational exposure to non-Hodgkin lymphoma and awarded damages. These verdicts did not settle the science, but they exposed the human cost and the corporate knowledge trails. Regulatory divide. International assessments have conflicted, one classifying glyphosate as a probable carcinogen, others finding insufficient evidence for carcinogenicity under typical use, revealing how risk framing can be tuned by scope, model assumptions, and industry submissions. The practical reality for farmers. Resistance emerges, rates climb, tank mixes get heavier, and the just glyphosate era morphs into multi-chemistry stacking. The residue burden on land and water follows suit. Neonicotinoids, systemic poisons that turn fertility silent. Systemic insecticides change the battlefield by embedding toxins into the plant from seed coating, translocating into pollen, nectar, and guttation droplets. The pitch: precision pest control. The outcome: collateral damage to pollinators and beneficial insects at landscape scale. Pollinator harm: controlled studies and field observations show impaired navigation, foraging, reproduction, and colony survival in bees under chronic low-dose exposure. Ecosystem cascade: invertebrate declines stretch beyond bees. Aquatic insect communities are sensitive to runoff from treated fields. Insectivorous birds decline where base prey collapses. Policy response: several major neonics were restricted or banned for outdoor use in multiple jurisdictions after risk. Assessments concluded field realistic exposures posed unmanageable risks to bees. Farmers were told seed coatings were insurance. In reality, many were blanket exposure without documented yield benefit in non-outbreak conditions, while locking growers into more expensive seeds and shifting the ecological baseline toward silence. The resistance treadmill: more spray, more spend. Less control chemistry made a promise. Control. Nature answered with adaptation. The treadmill looks like this. Herbicide resistance: amaranthus, ryegrass, water hemp, Palmer amaranth. Weed populations evolve resistance under selection pressure, especially in simplified rotations, and no till systems reliant on single modes of action. Insect resistance: target pests adapt to Bt toxins and other controls when refuge strategies are weak and trait stacks are deployed broadly. Fungicide resistance: repeated single-site fungicide use fosters resistant pathogen strains, necessitating rotations of actives and mixtures. The corporate response is always a new product, a new mode of action, a new stack, often more expensive, sometimes more hazardous, always more dependent. The treadmill converts agronomic crisis into sales growth. Farmers pay to stay in place. Soil: the living capital that chemicals devalue. Healthy soil is a community. Fungi, bacteria, nematodes, arthropods, roots, and organic matter bonded in structure that holds water, cycles nutrients, and resists erosion. Chemical dependency weakens that community. Microbial disruption: broad-spectrum herbicides and fungicides can suppress microbial guilds and enzyme activity, reducing nutrient cycling and organic matter formation. Organic matter decline: continuous tillage for weed control in non-tolerant systems or chemical-driven monocultures in tolerant systems often correlate with lower soil organic carbon. Compaction and erosion: heavy machinery and bare soil windows, combined with reduced root diversity, increase runoff and topsoil loss. Fertility externalization: nutrient supply shifts to synthetic fertilizers, which deliver short-term yield but can acidify soils, leach into waterways, and worsen structural decline. Farmers experiencing yield drag under stressed soils are sold inputs as solutions. The deeper solution: rebuild the soil web with rotations, cover crops, perennials, livestock integration, and reduced chemical pressure rarely aligns with proprietary sales targets. Water: carrying the bill. Downstream chemicals are mobile. What is applied does not remain politely within field boundaries. Runoff: storm events move residues into ditches, streams, rivers. Nutrient loads trigger algal blooms and dead zones. Pesticide pulses hit aquatic life. Groundwater: leaching introduces persistent compounds into aquifers, creating long remediation timelines and costly treatment burdens for municipalities. Drinking water: rural communities face boil advisories and filtration costs. Farmers and applicators face occupational exposure through mixing, loading, and spray drift. The ledger hides these costs until a crisis forces accounting. Then the bill arrives as public health advisories, litigation, and infrastructure upgrades, paid by everyone but priced by no one at the point of sale. Human exposure, the hidden ledger on bodies. Farm workers and rural families sit at the front line. Occupational risk, mixed load, application, field scouting, cumulative exposures, often with insufficient PPE or training in real-world conditions, increase risk of acute and chronic effects. Chronic endpoints. Epidemiological studies associate pesticide exposure with certain cancers, neurodevelopmental effects, Parkinsonian disorders, and reproductive issues, with variability by compound and exposure profile. Residue diets. Consumers encounter low-dose chronic exposures through residues in staple foods. Vulnerable groups, children, pregnant women, carry higher risk sensitivity. Corporate messaging emphasizes safe when used as directed. Real use includes wind, heat, fatigue, equipment failure, time pressure, and economic incentives to push weather windows. As directed, collapses under human reality. The economics of dependence. Margin erosion and debt. Chemicals are sold on promise. Higher yields, cleaner fields, less labor. But the ledger of a chemical-dependent farm often reads, rising input costs. Newer actives, trait fees, and bundled programs inflate per acre spend. Flat to shrinking margins. Commodity prices don't rise on schedule. Premiums require compliance. Costs eat gains. Debt servicing. Input costs roll into lines of credit. Missed seasons roll into restructuring. Leverage grows. Volatility exposure. Weather shocks and market swings turn high input systems brittle. Insurance replaces resilience. Farmers trapped on the treadmill fear stepping off because short-term yields might dip during transition. The system banks on that fear to perpetuate dependency. Regulatory theater. Captured language. Delayed action risk regulation is a battlefield of definitions. Acceptable daily intake. Reference dose. Reasonable certainty of no harm. Terms that turn population exposure into numbers adjustable by model inputs and uncertainty factors. Industry studies. Many dossiers are proprietary. Independent replication lags. Manufacturers frame realistic use scenarios that understate worst-case profiles. Policy lag. Restrictions arrive years after harm signals appear. Emergency approvals carve exceptions. Political pressure secures temporary reprieves. When bans do occur, for example, certain neonics, they often cover a subset of actives or uses, leaving functional substitutes that carry similar risks. The choreography maintains market continuity while projecting vigilance. The extension pipeline. Advice aligned to sales. Advisory channels matter. When agronomy advice flows from input suppliers, retail co-ops with sales quotas, or programs incentivized by manufacturer rebates, recommendations skew toward products, chemical solutions over system redesign. Against complexity, diverse rotations, cover crop stacks, livestock integration are too complex or uneconomic until someone proves otherwise locally. Toward standardization, uniform protocols simplify logistics, data collection, and inventory, but flatten resilience. Farmers are told, this is best practice. Best for whom? For farms seeking independence, best practice looks like diversified biology, not diversified billing codes. The path that rebuilds power. Agroecology is not a slogan. There is a proven path off the treadmill. Rotations with purpose. Break pest and disease cycles. Introduce functional diversity. Legumes for nitrogen, deep-rooted species for structure. Cover crops. Keep soil covered, feed microbes, reduce erosion, capture nutrients. Suppress weeds mechanically and biologically. Integrated pest management, IPM. Monitor. Set thresholds, use biological controls, and reserve chemicals as last resort, not first reflex. Perennial integration, hedgerows, buffer strips, agroforestry, habitat for beneficials, reduced drift, carbon sinks, water moderation. Livestock on the land. Managed grazing returns fertility, increases plant diversity, builds soil carbon. Local processing and markets. Escape trait and residue standardization by selling into community channels that value flavor, nutrition, and story, not just uniformity. Transition costs and learning curves are real, but farms that move this way report lower input dependence, more stable margins, and resilience under weather stress, the exact inverse of chemical lock-in. They made the rules to a game you never knew you were playing. They wrote the labels and the lab reports. They defined protection as perpetual purchase. They set the board so that every solution drives you deeper into dependency. And when nature answered with resistance, they sold the answer at a higher price. The longer you walk this path, the clearer the board becomes. The game is monopoly. Chemicals as utilities, trait fees as rents, protocols as ownership cards, and fines for deviation as the jail square. Farmers circle. Communities pay. Land carries the memory in residues and degraded structure. Choose sovereignty over spray. This is not a moral plea. It is a mechanical one. The chemical covenant is a design of extraction. The mechanics that reverse it are straightforward. Diversify biology, close nutrient loops, rebuild soil, redesign markets, and cut the tether to proprietary protocols that make you pay for control you never truly gain. Organize with neighbors. Share equipment for crimping and roller planting. Establish local labs for soil biology assessment. Train scouts in IPM. Build seed cooperatives. Create buyer clubs that accept variability and reward nutrition. Each step reduces the leverage chemicals hold over your ledger and your land. Farmers deserve a system where their skill replaces their subscription. Communities deserve food grown in living systems, not managed by perpetual spray. The board can be flipped, not by rhetoric, but by design choices repeated across fields until the narrative of must spray or die collapses under visible, measurable resilience. We will bring the final segment, labels and logistics, language weaponized, survival corporatized, at the same depth, and land the sign off with the force it deserves. This is the Sovereign Signal. Support the mission. Like, share, subscribe. Wake TF up.